From the News Channel 5 Network, this is Inside Politics.
Hello, everyone. I'm News Channel 5's political analyst, Pat Nolan. Welcome to Inside Politics. Nashville has been honored to host many presidents and former presidents of this country when they visited our city. This past week, we hosted the nation's oldest former chief executive, President Jimmy Carter. He just turned 95. While he was here, Mr. Carter continued his now 3-decade-long ministry, joining with hundreds of Nashvillians to build nearly 24 affordable homes through the Habitat for Humanity program. Our guest on Inside Politics today is a former top aide to President Carter, Linda Peek Schacht, who's now with Lipscomb University. Linda, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.
It must have been wonderful for you to see your former boss back in town.
It was, and it was really good to see vintage Jimmy Carter, who puts his faith first and who is not shy about telling people what he thinks as well.
He's in remarkably good shape for age 95. In fact, he came to Nashville despite suffering a pretty nasty fall the morning he was supposed to be here.
That's right. He fell and cut his forehead, had 14 stitches and a black eye, but he was there at the Ryman to kick off the week for Habitat Humanity on Sunday night, and then was at the work sites every day.
It seems to be the kind of accident that would have sidelined people half his age. Certainly would have been me. As long as you've known him, has he always shown that kind of commitment and determination and devotion to duty for the matters that concern him?
Yes, he was the hardest working person in the White House, and he expected everyone around him to work just as hard. He did it out of a sense of duty and understanding his oath of office, and expected other people to reach that standard as well.
He's a brain cancer survivor. He's had a broken hip. He's had other ailments to overcome. I guess he's living proof that getting old is not for sissies.
No, that's right, he is. But you know, I remember when he announced his cancer, and it was again vintage Jimmy Carter, where he combined his belief, his faith in God, with also his faith in science. And that's, you know, he's never been somebody who had a problem having both faith and science together to help achieve his goals.
Now, he and his wife Rosalind, who was here with him, the former First Lady, they don't just show up and pose for pictures at these Habitat events, and they do one of these of this size almost every year across the country. I mean, they show up every day, and they do a bit of work on every one of the houses that are being built.
That's right. This year, every porch of every house will have been built by Jimmy and Rosalind, and he's always pointing out that her name is like the flower. It's Rosalind, right? So many people along the last 40 years, you know, have forgotten that since she was First Lady, but they will have created the porch for every one of those homeowners.
When did you first meet President Carter?
In La Crosse, Wisconsin. I had flown there.
That's a long way from Georgia.
That's right. I had taken my last, well, I was working for the Urban League in Ohio at the time, and I called my dad and said, I really want to go to work for Jimmy Carter. I had seen him on TV, but hadn't met him.
This is after he'd won in Iowa,
after he won in Iowa, and he was in Wisconsin, and my dad, and I tell young people this, use everything you have to get in the door. You can prove how good you are after you get in the door, but use everything. So I called my dad and said, I want to go to work for Jimmy Carter. And he called me back and he said, okay, I know this guy in Georgia. He's going to get you in to see Jody Powell, who was the press secretary at the time, to interview you to go on the communications team. So I flew to La Crosse, Wisconsin. I heard him speak and met him. And one of the things that he said in the speech to farmers in La Crosse that really cinched the deal for me was the farmer said, how do you let Rosalind run all over the country speaking when St. Paul says in the Bible that women should be silent? And the president thought a minute, and then he said, I always had trouble with Paul on that. And I thought, so did I. So listen, you know, I really want to go to work for you.
You worked in communications in the White House.
I did. It's where I learned from him the importance of truth. He did promise the American people, I will never lie to you, and he pushed that through his cabinet and through his communications operations. And in fact, Jody Powell in his book indicates that the only lie that he ever told the press had to do with the rescue attempt for the hostages. And he felt it was so important that he had told a lie that he devoted a chapter in his book to it. You wouldn't see anybody do that today.
You've done a number of things in your career. You've worked for Senate Majority Leader after leaving the White House.
Yes.
You worked for USA Today. You worked for COCA COLA. You spent some time at Lipscomb University. But I suspect being in the White House is a singular experience. And is it like what you see? Is it like the West Wing on TV, or is it different?
Well, I don't think we all talked as fast as the people on West Wing.
And the crises don't necessarily happen right back to back every 5 seconds?
Well, they may do that, but Aaron Sorkin has a particular way of writing dialogue, right? And I think as Southerners, we didn't talk that fast. But it is exciting from the standpoint that you never know what the reporter on the other end of the line is going to ask. I once had duty over Thanksgiving and got a call from Helen Thomas, the famous reporter, wire reporter, who served under so many presidents, and she said, "Do you know where your president is?" And I realized that if he had moved from Camp David, I didn't know it. Nobody had told me. And she said, "Well, I'll tell you where he is, and you should have let us know." And so you never know what's going to happen on the other end of the line.
It used to be in politics that when people said, "I'm never going to lie to you," they would base that based on the facts. You could be proven one way or the other about that. Do you feel in Washington these days that perhaps it's no longer based on the facts, it's based on what people think is a set of facts, and everybody can have their own set of facts, even though people say you can't do that?
I think since President Carter, and we need to remember that the word spin was actually coined for the Reagan White House because they were so good at telling their story. I think since Carter and since the Reagan White House, and I really respect David Gergen, who was there, we have devolved into not a spin that's based in facts, but we've devolved in what can you get away with, and get away with meaning let them prove us wrong.
You see this increasing rancor and partisanship in Washington. We've always had partisanship, but perhaps more than I can ever remember in my lifetime. You begin to hear words, particularly as we go forward with this impeachment probe, of treason and somebody's a spy. We also hear people talking about the next election in terms of the Civil War. Does that concern you about our democracy going forward? Is it going to be able to survive in the future with this kind of situations going on?
Well, that last question is really sobering. The answer is yes, I think we're veering toward a constitutional crisis because we have chosen to weaponize words like treason. I think that it's going to take some sober thinking on the part of both Republicans and Democrats in the Congress on how we actually move forward in this very difficult time of impeachment.
Linda Peek Schacht, our guest on Inside Politics. She's a former aide to President Jimmy Carter, who was here this week building houses for Habitat for Humanity. Back to continue our conversation with Linda, and we'll talk a little 2020 politics later as well in the show after this break.